Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. Hey everybody, I hope you've had a restful Sunday so far, like it says in the intro. I am Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. And you've found your way to part 2 of Some Women Just Want to Watch the World Burn, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong and the Pizza Bomber. That's right, I said part 2. So if you haven't heard part 1 yet, go listen to it. It came out on Thursday the 24th. And if you've already heard part 1, well then great, we're ready to go. If you'll recall from part 1, in the course of their investigation, police retraced the path that the collar-bombing mastermind forced unfortunate pizza delivery man Brian Wells to take on the day of his ultimate demise. In following the clues, they were led to the property of one Bill Rothstein, and although he was not immediately under suspicion, Rothstein would then make a shocking 911 call in which he confessed that there was a body in the freezer in his garage. That's it, that's the recap from part 1. As I often do, I'll rewind the story just a bit to let you settle back into the narrative. So now, please do join me as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Part 2 of Some Women Just Want to Watch the World Burn, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong and the Pizza Bomber starts now. Bill Rothstein resumed his daily routine, attending to his tasks and minding his affairs. However, a significant shift occurred on September 20th, less than a month after Brian's tragic death. On this day, Bill made a startling and unsettling 911 call, revealing a disturbing discovery within the confines of his own home. He informed the authorities, in a matter-of-fact tone, at 8645 Peachtree Street, in the garage, there is a frozen body. It's in the freezer. Within mere hours of dialing 911, Bill found himself in police custody. Bill confessed that he had been hiding the body for a friend. He told authorities that he had been enduring weeks of guilt-stricken emotional agony, and his claim of unsettled misery was corroborated by the evidence investigators unearthed at his residence, a collection of power tools and supplies of professional grade, akin to the materials used in crafting the notorious collar bomb. In the labyrinth of Bill's personal effects, authorities discovered a handwritten suicide note, authored in stark black ink. The note conveyed Bill Rothstein's regret to, quote, those who cared for or about me, unquote, and identified the corpse in his freezer as James Roden, explicitly stating that he, quote, did not kill him nor participate in his death, unquote. Intriguingly, suspiciously, the note carried a specific disclaimer. Quoting again here, Bill had written, "This has nothing to do with the Wells case," unquote. And if that's what Bill Rothstein wanted the world to believe, had he tragically taken his own life, then it seems he also wanted them to believe that it was coincidental that he possessed not only the skill set, but all the tools and supplies required to construct the infamous collar bomb. I'm not sure that passes the smell test. But for now, let's dive into this enigmatic friend for whom Bill was storing a body. Must be a pretty close friend. In the middle of August, in the sweltering heat, Bill had received a call from none other than Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong, who was a love interest from his past. Marjorie confessed to him that she had fatally shot her live-in partner James Roden over a financial disagreement. 10 miles separated Bill Rothstein's home from Marjorie's, yet the gravity of the request she made bound them closer. She asked Bill to help her hide the body. Bill complied, concealing Roden's body in a freezer for over a month. He took the gun that Marjorie had used to shoot her boyfriend, broke it down into small pieces, and scattered them across Erie County. Bill said he'd had an abrupt change of heart when he suddenly started to fear what Marjorie might do to him now that he was the keeper of her dark and deadly secret. After storing James Roden's body for over a month, it occurred to him that he might end up stored in someone else's freezer. Do we believe that it was fear for his own safety that caused Bill Rothstein to call 911? Or perhaps is it the fact that the pizza bomb investigation had led authorities straight to his property, and he wanted to get out in front of the narrative? Well, let's see. A day after Bill's revelatory call, Marjorie was apprehended for the homicide of James Roden. 16 months later, a court declared her guilty but mentally ill, sentencing her to 7 to 20 years of incarceration. Bill, however, succumbed to lymphoma before Marjorie's conviction. On the surface, James Roden's death seemed disconnected from the federal investigation into the collar bomb case. Yet, in an ironic twist, Marjorie herself claimed the exact opposite. As we know, well before her arrest for Roden's murder, she was an infamous figure in Erie, notable for a series of ill-fated relationships. You'll recall that when law enforcement delved into her home in 1984, the scene was grim. Rotting food, trash, and fecal matter lay strewn around the residence. But despite her criminal record and mental health issues, Marjorie was highly intelligent, a detail not lost on investigators. As authorities pieced the puzzle together, Diehl-Armstrong fit the profile of someone capable of masterminding the complex bank heist. While she maintained her innocence, she divulged knowledge about the crime implicating both Bill and herself, and further suspicions arose when confidential informants testified that Marjorie had intimate knowledge of the crime. The narrative thickened when an additional character, Kenneth Barnes, an ex-TV repairman turned drug dealer, emerged. Kenneth's association with Marjorie led to his implication in the case. Pressured by the prospect of an elongated sentence, Barnes corroborated the belief that Marjorie was the linchpin behind the collar bomb plot. Her motive? Accumulating cash to hire an assassin to eliminate her father, thereby preserving her expected inheritance. On February 10, 2006, federal agents sat down with Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong. They informed her that they had amassed sufficient evidence to indict her for the bank heist and collar bombing. Marjorie's reaction was explosive. With a fury that shook the room, she pounded her fist on the conference table and unleashed a torrent of expletives at both the agents and her own legal counsel. Yet, perhaps driven by an overriding narcissism, she continued to engage in dialogue with them. In an ensuing meeting, she took it a step further. Diehl-Armstrong consented to drive around Erie with the agents to delineate her whereabouts on the day Brian Wells had committed the bank robbery. The journey was illuminating. She confirmed that she had been at multiple locations closely tied to the crime. However, at the conclusion of this drive, she pulled in the reins, telling agents that she wouldn't divulge any more details without an immunity deal. The irony here is stark. By this point, she'd already said too much. Any chance for immunity had effectively vanished the moment she decided to cooperate in this morbid sightseeing tour with federal agents. In her drive to assert control, or perhaps in a miscalculation born out of her complex psychological profile, Diehl-Armstrong sealed her own fate. The path to indictment had been paved, and there was no turning back. In this convoluted tale of Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong and the pizza bombing, the threads of multiple lives were woven into a tapestry of deceit, intelligence, and criminality. Each revelation intensified the complexity of the investigation, an intricate network of actions and motivations, stretching from Bill Rothstein's garage to Marjorie's disturbing past, and ultimately culminating in a crime that baffled and horrified a community, the nation, and ultimately the world. In July of 2007, U.S. Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan stood in front of a sea of cameras and declared that the collar bomb case was closed. Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes had been charged. The indictment even implicated the victim, Brian Wells, as a co-conspirator who had later become an unwilling participant. The official narrative had taken almost 4 years and over 1,000 interviews to construct. For Brian's family, seated among the press, disbelief and shock filled the air. His sister Barbara couldn't contain her outrage, yelling, "Liar!" at Buchanan. And they were not the only skeptics. The case had been followed closely by the public. Those who had been meticulously tracking each new development were also left with a profound sense of dissatisfaction, riddled with questions. And a week later, those questions ballooned when the FBI made another shocking revelation. The entire scavenger hunt had been an elaborate sham. The collar bomb was designed such that any tampering would set it off. Brian had been on a path to a predetermined fate, death. Then comes Kenneth Barnes, a key player in this labyrinthine case. In September of 2008, he entered a guilty plea to the charges of conspiracy and weapons violations connected to the collar bomb scheme. Barnes was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Yet, in a strategic move, he agreed to testify against Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong with the hopes of having his sentence reduced. Diehl-Armstrong's trial was anticipated to be the crucible in which all lingering mysteries would be resolved. But there would be obstacles. First, a federal judge declared her mentally unfit to be tried, and then just when it appeared that she might finally stand trial, she was diagnosed with glandular cancer, and once again, the legal proceedings were suspended pending her medical prognosis. Fast forward to August 2010. The medical professionals gave their assessment. Diehl-Armstrong had between 3 to 7 years left on this earth. Faced with this grim timeline, the prosecutors made a decision. The trial would go on. The quest for answers was deemed too crucial to be delayed any longer. The trial date was reset for October 12, 2010. The wheels of justice, though grinding slowly, were back in motion. It was a case too convoluted and too devastating to be left unresolved. By the 5th day, the courtroom was heavy with tension. Prosecutor Marshall Piccinini had meticulously assembled a case as damning as it was intricate. He depicted the participants as a cast of, quote, twisted, intellectually bright, dysfunctional individuals who outsmarted themselves, unquote. His evidence was bolstered by 7 former inmates, each recounting disturbing details that Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong had shared with them. Then came Ken Barnes, the crown jewel in Piccinini's case, a character whose appearance belied his role as a critical witness. Barnes looked a decade older than his years, and his scant dental array, his lack of teeth, didn't inspire confidence. But when he took the oath and sat in the witness box, every ounce of doubt seemed to dissipate. The room fell into a hushed silence as Barnes began to speak. Hey everyone, before we resume the story, it felt important to me to pause for a moment and share a couple of things with you. Obviously, this story, the story of the pizza bombing and Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong, is a story that heavily features a person facing serious mental health struggles. In Diehl-Armstrong's case, she was diagnosed as bipolar and likely narcissistic in the extreme. And there's no question that these challenges contributed directly to the struggles in her life and to the crimes that she committed. However, since openness and communication about mental health challenges are something that I explicitly advocate for and think is super important, I wanted to take a second just to point out that the vast majority of people struggling with mental health issues, the vast majority, are not criminals or malefactors, and they are certainly not violent. Even people who have mental health disorders that are more commonly associated with crime, still the vast majority of them are not criminals and are by no means violent. They're people facing tough challenges and just trying to figure out how to live their lives like the rest of us. All of us who walk this earth face existential crises and difficulties, and if mental health is not one of yours, then count yourself blessed in that regard. Although, whatever you do face, I'm sure, has its moments of extreme difficulty. And with that in mind, I'd like to remind you all, as I often do, about the free 24-hour, 7 days a week Lifeline number 988, that's 988, that you can call anytime to receive immediate counseling for mental health, substance issues, or suicidal thoughts. So if you find yourself in a dark place, please do call 988, and please do remember that you are loved and the world is a better place with you in it. Now, I'm not qualified to counsel you if you're going through real struggles, but if you'd just like to reach out, to connect with someone, to share your story, to talk about the challenges you're facing if you struggle with a disability, I myself have cerebral palsy, please do feel free to reach out to me. I'm here, I care, and I would love to connect with you. You can reach me by emailing me, kindofmurdery@gmail.com, reaching out on social media at kindofmurdery on all platforms, or by calling the Kind of Murdery hotline, 888-MURDERY. That's 888-687-3379. And by the way, I would love for you to call the hotline and share your personal Kind of Murdery story and perhaps inspire an episode of the show. All right, and with that, let's get back to part 2 of Some Women Just Want to Watch the World Burn, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong and the Pizza Bomber. According to Barnes, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong was the architect of the entire scheme, the puppeteer pulling the strings. Bill Rothstein was one of her recruited accomplices, and so was Brian Wells, lured by the prospect of easy money, something Wells desperately needed. It turned out that Wells, the seemingly innocuous pizza delivery man, had a sordid secret, an ongoing relationship with a prostitute funded by crack cocaine obtained with Ken Barnes' assistance. Debt was piling up. Brian Wells was sinking fast. The crux of Barnes' testimony came when he described the chilling afternoon of the crime. Wells had been delivering pizzas to a TV transmission tower when the weight of betrayal struck him like a bolt of lightning. The bomb he wore was not fake. Bringing the pizzas to the address given to him by Rothstein, Brian had tried to run when confronted with the bomb collar, but it was of no use. He was tackled by Rothstein and forcibly secured into the nightmarish device. Wells had told the truth. The bomb was not fake. As Barnes narrated this, the room remained dead silent, as if every person present was holding their breath. It was a grim revelation, outlining a sequence of events that entangled multiple lives in a web of deceit, manipulation, and, ultimately, destruction. Throughout Ken Barnes' damning testimony, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong's face was a theater of turmoil. Each of his words seemed to land like a personal insult, and she couldn't contain her outrage. Whispering furiously to her attorney, her occasional outbursts of "liar" punctuated the courtroom, earning her multiple rebukes from the presiding judge. It was clear that the experience of sitting there, subjected to a narrative that painted her as a mastermind of malevolence, was almost unbearable for her. Then came October 26th, the 8th day of the trial, a day that would be forever etched in the annals of the case. Marjorie took the stand, and for 5.5 hours, spread across 2 days, she commanded the room. Her unkempt, greasy black hair framed a face that was both defiant and unpredictable. Every time she spoke, she generated an atmosphere of bewildering anticipation. Her words were erratic and unexpected. She spared no one, neither her own defense attorney, whom she accused of asking, quote, stupid questions, unquote, nor the prosecutor, whom she openly disparaged, saying, if this is the kind of evidence you have against me, I'm telling you this is a pitiful case. Her emotional range was operatic. She cried, she yelled, she swung wildly between extremes. The judge had to rein her in, issuing warnings, and cutting her off more than 50 times. Marjorie's near omission of Brian Wells during her hours-long testimony was a stark contrast to the flurry of other accusations and insults she hurled. It seemed that during her sometimes unhinged testimony, no one in her life, no one in the courtroom, no one involved in the case was spared from Diehl-Armstrong's vitriol. And yet, someone was spared. Someone was barely mentioned. She addressed Brian Wells merely as a footnote in her sprawling diatribe, but her single statement dropped like a stone in a still pond. Its ripples carried weight. I never met Brian Wells, she said, and I never knew Brian Wells. Never. I became aware of him the day that he died. I saw it on the news. These words clashed with the elaborate narrative that the prosecution had meticulously built, casting a shadow of doubt, however fleeting. Was Marjorie distancing herself from Brian as a calculated move? Or was this a genuine proclamation of innocence in regard to him? If the jury had already been grappling with Marjorie's credibility, this declaration made it even more complex. Her statement left the courtroom suspended in a moment of collective contemplation. Could it be that Brian Wells, the man who died so tragically, was merely a pawn in a game that he didn't even know he was part of? And if Marjorie was telling the truth, what did that mean for the case that had been so carefully constructed against her? A case that presented her as the spider on the web, behind every terrible thing that happened, behind everything connected to the bank heist, the bomb, the frozen bodies, the murders, the drug abuse, everything. This simple moment of calm declaration among the chaos, this simple statement, I never met Brian Wells and I never knew Brian Wells. Never. I became aware of him the day that he died. I saw it on the news. It read as a quiet declaration of fact, one of the few times Marjorie presented as rational, rather than wildly unhinged. But it was a moment that offered no answers, only more questions. This brief mention of Brian, isolated in a torrent of words, posed a stark contrast to the elaborate stories spun around her. It was as if Marjorie was in a universe all her own, impervious to the narratives that sought to define her, but fundamentally linked to the tragedy that unfolded on that fateful day. The courtroom had become an arena where the last act of this grim story unfolded. Each participant, from the accused to the accusers, had laid out their version of events. The prosecution, spearheaded by Marshal Piccinini, had unspooled a compelling narrative depicting Marjorie and her circle as a web of, and I imagine you remember this quote, twisted, intellectually bright, dysfunctional individuals who outsmarted themselves. Against this backdrop, Marjorie had taken the stand, her erratic performance doing little to clarify the intricacies of the case. Yet, it was her near omission of Brian Wells that stood as a puzzling outlier, one that seemed to underscore the myriad complexities and unanswered questions still looming over this tragic affair. The jury found themselves at a crossroads, left to sift through a mountain of evidence and hours of testimony. Their task was monumental, to piece together a story that had unraveled across years and involved multiple lives, all steeped in deceit and dire intentions. The weight of the decision ahead of them was immense. Not just a verdict, but the final punctuation on a narrative rife with human tragedy and moral darkness. With the eyes of the court upon them, they withdrew to deliberate. Their conclusion would be the next, and perhaps final, although perhaps not, chapter in a saga that had already caused so much loss, sorrow, and endless questions. And if you'd like to find out what the jury decided and what questions remain, especially according to ex-FBI agent Jim Fisher, who feels that the remaining questions demonstrate that the correct answer was never arrived at in the first place, then please do join me this Thursday, August 31st, for Part 3, the thrilling conclusion of Some Women Just Want to Watch the World Burn, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong and the Pizza Bomber. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.